Good morning. It's 4 hours behind the UK here in Brazil, so I have to get up very early to work to maintain my usual schedule. Anyway, let's do this! Metallica, Megadeth, Judas Priest, these legendary bands have had some hiccups along the way, to say the least. When your career spans multiple decades, you're inevitably going to have some hiccups, but they've always managed to pull their gosh darn socks up and salvage things and get the job done. Judas Priest are probably doing better now than they ever have been, and those guys are like 200,000 years old. But what about when bands fall off and never return? I think there's 3 different types of falling off. Falling off creatively, falling off professionally, and just like completely changing your sound and alienating your fan base. So in this here video, we're going to be looking at metal bands who completely fell off, in my opinion, and never quite got back. And to reiterate, the views expressed in this video are mine and mine alone. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't. Let me know in the comments below. So don't get your knickers in a twist. Let's bloody do this. So I made a short about Iron Maiden specifically the other day, which is what inspired me to turn this into a full video. So apologies if you've seen that already, but I just wanted to expand upon a few points. Maiden are definitely a top 3 band of all time for me. They're the band that got me into metal, got me sort of like wanting to play that type of guitar music. I was completely obsessed with them for the longest time, and I think they're one of only 2 bands which I can pretty much name like every song in the discography. Maybe some fellow millennial Iron Maiden fans will remember, but I have very fond memories of going to HMV when I was younger and buying all of those reissue CDs with the pictures on the side, so you put them all together and it makes, I think it was like the Iron Maiden or Killers album cover or something. Oh, it was so cool. Anyway, I'm saying all of this because I want you to know that my gripes and hang-ups about Maiden come from a place of passion and being way too invested in it. But in short, it really breaks my heart, to be honest, to see what the band has become. It really feels like they've completely just fucking signed off, clocked out, and like they're done. Bruce and Adrian are obviously way more invested in their solo projects. Nico is obviously retired. Dave has expressed a keen interest in retiring. And now what's left is pretty much just the Steve Harris solo project. What used to be this monolithic metal force of nature that was fueled by an obvious and evident passion for the music and the fans has now just turned into this sort of empty, hollow brand. I know a lot of die-hard Maiden fans will defend the band to the end no matter what, and I admire that, and that's cool, but there's no way you can look me in the eye with a straight face and say, yes, those last 3 albums were definitely up to the very high Maiden standard. Oh, there's just so many things that grind my gears about this stuff. First off is the most annoying thing, which is Steve Harris's newfound obsession with wanting to make every song like 10 minutes long or longer. Yes, Maiden are very good at writing long songs, but only when they're like this sort of cool centerpiece of an album, and nearly all of these are fucking sick. But that being said, Maiden just do not have the musical like palette and depth to be able to write like a whole 60, 70, 80-minute album full of these songs. Like, they just don't have enough cool ideas. Nearly every song on Senjutsu starts with like this really pointless, just like 2-minute plus long clean intro that has like nothing to do with the rest of the song. I think like the entire back half of the last album, I think, which is all written by Steve, starts in like exactly the same way. It's just like, why? And they all have this really annoying, like super basic string sound, like over the top. Just got this image of Steve sitting at home on his computer, playing around with Cubase on his like MIDI keyboard. He finds this cool string patch. He's like, oh yeah, I like that. Furthermore, the last 2 albums literally have some of the worst mixes I've ever heard in my life. Like, I just cannot fathom how a band of this size, with this many resources, can sign off on a mix that sounds this bad. Like, I don't think even Darkthrone would have been okay with the mix on Book of Souls. Lastly, something that's probably not so obvious to a lot of fans is the fact that the band basically has like 0 internet presence, which is honestly, I think, really hurting them and will definitely hurt them moving forward. I've been making content on this channel for many years now, And as a result, I feel like I always have a pretty good sense of like what's popular and what's not. And I'll be brutally honest with you, Maiden is not really that popular with the kids. I mean, Maiden is still a fucking huge band. There's obviously still tons of kids who are into them. If you go to one of their shows, you'll see hordes of children there wearing Maiden shirts and stuff. But I think this is mostly a case of like the love of the band has been passed down from their families to the kids. And what I'm talking about is more like organic reach, like kids discovering the band for themselves off their own back, like we did. Metallica, Megadeth, Pantera, Sabbath, Death, Slayer. Kids fucking love these bands, either because of the music, or like via memes online, or like via content creators. But for some reason, Maiden just don't seem to have like the same appeal. And honestly, these days, if I make any sort of content about Maiden, it gets pretty garbage views compared to if I make a video about like literally any of the other huge metal bands. I mean, Bruce is obviously a legend and the face of the band these days, but he doesn't really have that same sort of like fun appeal that someone like Dave Mustaine does, for example. Like Bruce is a lot more serious and like bourgeoisie. I mean, there are whole channels on YouTube with like 100k plus subs that are dedicated literally just to making Metallica and Megadeth memes. But I never see anything like that for Maiden, like at all. There's just like no memes or anything surrounding the band. I don't know, that might sound ridiculous and a lot of you will probably scoff at that statement, but honestly, it's pretty important these days. And I'm not gonna lie, I do kind of worry about the future of the band and the legacy that they're setting themselves up for. I will obviously always love Maiden, they're one of my all-time favorites, and I implore anybody who's never seen them live to go check them out at least once. But Steve Harris, mate, if you're watching, which you're probably not, why would you be wasting your time? Then please just stop trying to be like Baby's My First Prog Band and just go back to writing some sick Maiden bangers, please. And I'm pretty curious actually, if you're a younger viewer watching my channel and you're not really a fan of Maiden, please leave a comment below saying why that is. Is it because of the music? Like, is it too cheesy and melodic? Or is it the band just not being very likable? What is it? Okay, I know Muse aren't a metal band, but they're metal adjacent for sure, and I know a lot of you out there, like me, are very big fans. So for the vast majority of my 20s, Muse was my absolute favourite #1 band of all time. I know that they're very cheesy and a bit of an acquired taste, to say the least, but for me, Muse were just everything I ever wanted in a band. Like, their unique mix of alternative rock, metal, and classical music was just like perfect. And their classic run of albums from Origin of Symmetry through to The Resistance is still 10 out of 10, absolutely unbeatable. The band was obviously super inspired throughout this time, and their sound was very, very cohesive and focused. The problem was, like many great bands, they eventually wanted to like mix things up and change their sound. So they started to like change direction and experiment with different styles, dabbling in this and that. While all of the albums since then do have some really sick songs like here and there, they just never really quite hit the mark again. And every album since The Resistance has just been sort of like a weird mess, like mishmash of different ideas and styles. It's like, it's all still very much Muse and it's all roughly tied together under like, you know, the Muse umbrella. The problem is, it's just like not focused like at all. And they've tried a few times now to try and gravitate back to that original sound. The problem is, it's been like such a long time now, it just sounds like really contrived, and to be honest, like these days, they just sound like a fucking parody of themselves. It's like quite hard to listen to. They'll always be one of my nearest and dearest, you know, I always have infinite amounts of time for the classic Muse stuff. But unfortunately, I do think this band is just like kind of done. They've pretty much like lost all relevancy in the modern music scene now, and it's just about like the old fans and the nostalgia. But hey, there's a new album coming out and I would love to be proved wrong. Fall of Ideals by All That Remains is without a doubt one of the shining highlights in that classic 2000s metalcore era. Probably only beaten by Ascendancy and Waking the Fallen, I would say. With a fucking perfect balance of super catchy, memorable songwriting, great performances, and disgusting solos by the late great Ollie Herbert. Their 2008 follow-up Overcome was also ridiculously good, with the band obviously sort of trying to capitalize on the success of the album before and striving towards a bit more of a commercial sound. But after that, All That Remains just kind of just vanished into the ether. There was a bunch of hype around their big comeback album last year, I think it was, especially with the news that sizable guitar lad Jason Richardson would be joining them on shred duties. Holy shit though, what a letdown. The songs were soulless, like sterile, like not memorable at all. Completely devoid of all of the amazing hooks that made the original stuff so good. I guess no matter how hard a band tries, sometimes it's just impossible to recapture that magic. I've also seen and heard a lot of stuff about how their frontman is a bit of a tool, and if I remember rightly, Jason actually left the band shortly after the album came out, so I'm sure there's other things going on there too behind the scenes. Believe it or not, there was actually a time when Dragon Force was a legitimately amazing power metal band and didn't just write horrendous gimmick songs for video games. I remember when I first discovered Dragon Force, like, oh my god, those early albums were just like fucking mind-blowing. Especially Sonic Firestorm, which I think is by far the best one and probably one of the greatest power metal albums ever made. There was really nothing like it at the time. Even though the music has always obviously been very over the top and very silly, earlier stuff still had enough seriousness about it and enough musical depth for it to be like really engaging and legitimately super cool. Valley of the Damned, Sonic Firestorm, Human Rampage, even like the few albums after that, they still had that cool kind of power metal magic about them, you know? Over time though, however, the band gradually strayed from their power metal roots and leaned a lot more into the sort of arcade, retro video game kind of aesthetic, following the trend of modern power metal bands being a bit more sort of like light-hearted, party kind of thing. And now, unfortunately, the seriousness is kind of like all but just completely being stripped away. I will always love Dragon Force, I fucking love those guys, but what they do these days just seems like so insincere, and as with Muse earlier, they just really sound like a parody of themselves these days. However, with the recent surprise announcement of introducing Alyssa from Arch Enemy as a new second vocalist, I'm hoping that that will sort of like revitalize the band and breathe some much needed life and excitement back into them. Speaking of Arch Enemy, this is probably going to be a bit of a controversial one, but to me, this is one of those drop-offs that's honestly the most disappointing. So when it comes to classic Melodeath, I think honestly Arch Enemy is the absolute pinnacle. Yes, of course, In Flames, At the Gates, Children of Bodom, Black Dahlia Murder, all insane bands, but man, you absolutely cannot beat classic Arch Enemy. Doomsday Machine, Wages of Sin, Anthems of Rebellion, even those early albums with that bloke singing, oh! What was so great about that stuff is that the melody was incorporated into the death metal stuff so organically, so well, that it didn't seem like forced or contrived. The brutality and the melody just fused together so well. Jesus Christ, so I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I cannot stand the Alyssa era of this band. It is just like absolutely unlistenable to me. Like the band literally went from an absolute like powerhouse of the genre to like the most sterile corporate boardroom music like overnight. Maybe a lot of you don't really pick up on this thing or even care for that matter, but as someone with a lot of musical experience, like I just can't help but notice how the music in this era was just like made in such a calculating, algorithmic way just to try and like, you know, appeal to the most amount of people as possible and just to be as safe as possible. In my opinion, if you want a textbook definition of what selling out means, like Arch Enemy is an absolute great case. Just the right amount of aggression to be a bit edgy, but not too much to put people off. Just the right amount of melody to keep things sweet and have some radio-friendly hooks. A little bit of guitar soloing, but not too much, because it makes people bored if you have guitar solos that are too long. And don't get me started on the clean singing. Oh. Honestly, if you listen to all the singles from this era, like the majority of them sound exactly the same. Like the band literally just wrote like the same song like 20 times. I know they recently changed singer and the new song is pretty cool, I guess, but it's not really like anything that different to what we've heard before, right? But hey, I'm looking forward to the album and I shall reserve judgment until then. Children of freaking Bodom. Another one of my absolute all-time favorite bands and a prime example of how a band can sometimes unfortunately just completely lose their mojo overnight. They were one of those bands that just looked like they were completely fucking unstoppable. Like their run of albums from Something Wild all the way up to Are You Dead Yet Just like 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10. Oh. The latter album exploded and catapulted the band to some serious success, and everyone was waiting with bated breath to see what their next move was. Unfortunately though, following Are You Dead Yet, they could never quite repeat that success, and they just began like this sad, gradual downfall. Whether it was down to Alexi's declining health issues and stuff, or whether the band were just simply out of ideas, the overall quality of music in the band's second half of the career compared to the first was just really poor. It seems to be a sad, really common trend with bands where they reach like a certain level of success and then just can't quite manage to like follow through with that. And to be honest, that really is the difference between like the big boys and the big boys are the ones who managed to really capitalize on that success and follow through with it. Their final album, Hexed, I think it was called, was actually really fucking cool. Definitely the best out of all of their like later albums by far. Unfortunately though, as we all know, by that point it was too little too late. Rest in peace, King. Mwah. Now, I love Sepultura as much as the next guy, but it is folly to deny the fact that Max was objectively the face of the band and probably the biggest part of what made the band's classic material so successful. As sick as those early thrash albums were, it's undeniable that their 90s groove metal kind of stuff was really what put them on the map and cemented them as heavy metal icons. You could definitely argue that those albums were instrumental in shaping nu metal in the 90s, and to be honest, Roots is still a massively influential album, even on modern bands today. Back home, sometimes I judge a local metal Battle of the Bands competition every year, where bands compete to play Bloodstock Festival in the UK, and honestly, I think I've heard the song Roots being covered by like sort of young teenage bands like 3 or 4 times. Kids fucking love that shit. Now, unfortunately, with rock and metal music, when you have such a key, iconic frontman, and they happen to leave the band, it usually doesn't end too well for them. Alas, unfortunately, Sepultura was no exception. Even though they soldiered on with new frontman Derek Green, who was fucking awesome by the way, and a lot of the albums that they did together were actually super sick, obviously the band never got anywhere near to recapturing that level of success that they had with Max. So, with this one, you're either going to be nodding along enthusiastically with me, or reaching for the nearest general household object to throw at the screen in disagreement. So the interesting thing about Opeth, obviously, is that their discography is divided into 2 very distinct halves. So distinct, in fact, that a lot of people even go so far as to really sort of think about them as 2 distinct, separate entities. For the first 20 years or so of their career, they played an incredibly unique mix of melodic death metal and prog rock, releasing some of the most perfect albums of all time, regardless of genre. And then, since 2011's Heritage, the band did a complete 180 and leaned pretty much like entirely into the prog rock side of things, nearly completely doing away with all of the metal elements. Now, fans' opinions on the latter half of their career seems to sort of depend entirely on when exactly they got into the band. For example, there's loads of fans on my Discord server who I know for a fact are only familiar with later Opeth. Oh, Jesus Christ, I'm so old. For me personally, I really am not much of a fan at all of any of the albums post-Watershed, really. Like, I really appreciate them. There's some super cool moments, and I'm sure like any band out there would be super happy to have these albums on their discography. None of these albums are like bad by any stretch. It's just not what I want when I listen to Opeth, you know? It's like turning up to a shoe shop to buy a nice new pair of trainers or sneakers if you're American. And you turn up to the establishment and then they start trying to sell you oversized Mexican hats. You know, you'd be a little bit perturbed. For me, yeah, I love the prog side of Opeth, but I also fucking love the melodeath side of Opeth, you know? I want some cool riffs and growls and stuff too. I don't just want shitloads of Hammond organ. The majority of the stuff post-Watershed is just like way too self-indulgent and like dreary, and it's just not really like much to latch onto. It's a real shame because I feel like it's been so long now that people have kind of forgotten just how perfect those older albums are. I mean, yeah, songs like Sorceress are pretty fucking cool, but like when you put them next to stuff from Ghost Reveries and Still Life, like, Nah, not really. Right, so there you have it. There is my list of the most obvious examples I could think of bands who took a little bit of a... But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Do you agree, disagree? Which bands would you have added in case I do a part 2? Ooh. Cheers guys, take care, and I'll see you very soon. Goodbye.
All right, mate. Do that, then do that. Nice one.